My name is Jimmy Collins, and at 62 years old, I never imagined I'd hear my own daughter look me in the eye and say, "This house is mine now." Those words cut deeper than any blade, because this wasn't just a house. It was the home I built with my hands, the place where I raised her after her mother passed. And in that moment, standing in the doorway of my own living room, I realized the child I once sacrificed everything for had turned into my greatest betrayer. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so you never miss a story like this again. I stood in the doorway of the house I had built with my own two hands, the walls echoing with memories of a life I thought I had given selflessly to my family. The smell of fresh paint lingered, but not because I had chosen it. My daughter, Emma, had insisted on repainting everything, erasing traces of the home her mother and I had carefully shaped over decades. My photographs were gone, the familiar furniture discarded. Even the old oak dining table where we had shared Christmas dinners sat abandoned in the garage like a relic of a forgotten age. And then she said it, calm, almost cold, her words slicing through me like a knife. "This house is mine now, Dad. You should start getting used to that." I froze. My mouth went dry. The silence between us was deafening. The daughter I had once carried on my shoulders, the little girl who used to beg me to read bedtime stories until she fell asleep, now stood across from me with her arms folded, her husband smirking just behind her shoulder. "Mine," she repeated, emphasizing the word as if to drive the nail deeper. It wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration. A line in the sand. I tried to steady myself, gripping the edge of the doorframe. "Emma," I said, my voice trembling but low, "this is still my home. I paid for every brick, every nail. Your mother's memories are here. How could you even say that?" Her husband, Mark, stepped forward with that smug little grin he always wore. He was the kind of man who thrived on manipulation. Slick hair, pressed shirt, a tone that always carried the faintest air of superiority. "Come on, Jimmy," he said, patting my shoulder like I was some senile old man. "You're getting older. Don't you think it's time to start thinking about what's best for Emma and the kids? They need stability. You don't need all this space anymore." I felt my chest tighten. Stability. This house was stability. It had been my blood, my sweat, my life poured into something I hoped would shelter generations. And now they stood there, acting as if I was a burden in the very home I had given them access to. I wanted to shout. I wanted to remind them of the nights I worked double shifts, the weekends I missed with friends, the years I sacrificed to keep this roof over our heads after Emma's mother passed away. But my words stuck because deep down I realized something chilling. Emma believed every word she had just said. To her, this house wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. The betrayal stung worse than any physical blow. "I'll give you some time," Emma said finally, her tone flat, dismissive. "But sooner or later, you'll see it my way. You can stay in the guest room for now. But the master bedroom? That's ours." My knees nearly buckled. The master bedroom, the place where my wife and I had dreamed together, fought, loved, raised our child. It was being claimed right in front of me, as though my entire life could be divided up like an estate I hadn't even left behind yet. I stepped back, unable to breathe, my eyes darting to the photographs now boxed up by the staircase. Decades of my life reduced to cardboard. And then the words came out of me, quiet but sharp enough to silence them both. "One day, you'll regret this. One day, you'll be begging for my help." Emma's eyes flickered, a flash of something. Anger. Maybe guilt. But Mark laughed, clapping his hands together like the show was over. "We'll see about that, old man. We'll see." That night, I sat alone in the garage, surrounded by the pieces of my past. Dusty boxes, old furniture, photo albums shoved aside like junk. My heart felt heavy, but my mind was turning, twisting, Something inside me hardened, like steel being forged in fire. They thought I was broken, humiliated, finished, but they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to the edge. As I ran my hand across the old oak table, I whispered to myself, if they want to play this game, they've just invited the wrong man. And that's where it began. But before I tell you how I made them pay, how I turned every ounce of their greed and arrogance into their undoing, you need to understand how we got here. You need to know the love I gave, the sacrifices I made, and how slowly, over time, the child I raised slipped into someone I could hardly recognize, because betrayals like this, they don't happen overnight. They build, quietly, patiently, until one day you wake up and realize your own flesh and blood is turned against you. And so, let me take you back to the days when Emma was still my little girl, when this house still felt like a sanctuary, and when I still believed love and sacrifice could never be forgotten. When I think back to the beginning, before all of this bitterness and betrayal, I remember the laughter that used to fill this house. Emma was my only child, and after her mother, Margaret, passed away from breast cancer, she became the center of my universe. She was only 14 then, so fragile, so lost. I promised myself I would be both mother and father to her, and I swore on Margaret's grave that Emma would never want for anything as long as I lived. I worked 12-hour shifts at the factory, sometimes taking on side jobs on weekends, roof repairs, lawn work for neighbors, even odd carpentry projects. My back ached constantly, my hands grew calloused, but I told myself it was worth it. Every scraped knuckle and late-night drive home was fuel for her future. College, stability, a good life. That was the dream. I didn't buy myself new clothes, didn't take vacations, didn't even replace the old pickup until it gave out completely. Every dollar I saved was another brick in the foundation of the life I wanted her to have. Emma grew up in this house surrounded by love, though not much luxury. She wore second-hand clothes sometimes, but she always had a hot meal, a safe bed, and a father who would have laid down his life for her without hesitation. I still remember her sitting on my lap at the kitchen table, coloring in little books while I paid bills late into the night. She would look up at me with those big hazel eyes and say, "Daddy, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house so you never have to work again." I would smile, kiss her forehead and tell her, "Sweetheart, all I'll ever want is for you to be happy." But as the years passed, something in her shifted. It was subtle at first. A little more impatience in her tone, a sharper edge when she didn't get what she wanted. I told myself it was just teenage rebellion. All kids go through it, I thought. Still, I gave in too easily. Anything to avoid seeing her unhappy. When she asked for a brand new phone instead of the used one I'd gotten her, I worked 2 extra weekends to buy it. When she wanted to go on a senior trip with her friends, I pawned my old watch to make sure she had spending money. Sacrifice had become my second language. College was the turning point. Emma got into a good school, one Margaret and I had always dreamed she would attend. But tuition wasn't cheap. I dipped into my savings, cashed out a small life insurance policy, even took on debt. I told myself I was investing in her future, in her success. "Don't worry, Dad," she told me, hugging me tight before leaving for the dorms. "I'll make you proud. I'll pay you back one day." But the payback never came. Instead, as she grew older, she grew colder. Calls became less frequent. Holidays, she would breeze in with new clothes, new friends, always rushing, always distracted. By the time she introduced me to Mark, her college boyfriend, later her husband, I knew something was off. He had that smile that never reached his eyes, that tone that dripped with polite condescension. The first time he shook my hand, he gripped too firmly, as though trying to prove something. "So this is the famous Jimmy Collins," he said, looking me up and down like I was a curiosity. "Emma talks about how hard you work. That's admirable, admirable." The words stung, like I was some relic of the past. Still, I tried. I wanted her happy, even if I didn't like the man she'd chosen. I welcomed him into our home, bit my tongue when he made snide comments about the neighborhood or the squeaky floorboards. When they got engaged, I offered to pay for part of the wedding. I couldn't afford much, but I scraped together enough for the catering deposit. Mark never thanked me, not once. After they married, the distance grew worse. They rarely visited, and when they did, it was always quick. Half an hour here, a rushed dinner there. Mark's voice carried the most during those visits. He spoke about investments, promotions, houses in better neighborhoods. He would glance around my living room like it was beneath them. Like this house wasn't the fortress of memories and sacrifice it truly was. Emma would nod, smile politely, and I'd sit there, forcing myself to believe she was still my little girl underneath it all. The humiliations came quietly, one after another, like little cracks spreading through the walls of a house. I remember Emma's 30th birthday vividly. I had saved up to buy her a delicate gold bracelet, something Margaret would have chosen. When she unwrapped it in front of her friends, she forced a smile and said, "Thanks, Dad. That's sweet." But her friends were all gifting her expensive handbags, luxury perfumes, things that sparkled in ways my gift never could. Later, I found the bracelet tucked in a drawer, unworn. Or the Christmas when I bought toys for my grandchildren, handcrafted wooden puzzles and cars I spent weeks sanding and painting in the garage. The kids opened them, looked once, then tossed them aside for the flashy plastic gadgets Mark's parents had brought. Emma didn't even look at me when it happened. She just busied herself pouring more wine. I sat there, smiling politely while my heart sank. The echo of Margaret's laughter long gone from the room. Little things piled up. Mark started handling all the house talk whenever they came over, speaking as though Emma couldn't decide anything without his input. Emma, once so affectionate, began correcting me in front of others. Small, sharp remarks that made me feel foolish, outdated. "Dad, don't say it like that," she'd snap when I told a story. "Dad, you don't understand how things work these days," she'd say with a roll of her eyes. And yet, every time they needed something, babysitting, money for emergencies, help with repairs, I was there. When their furnace broke, I fixed it. When Mark's car battery died, I drove across town to jump it. When they couldn't make rent one month, I pulled money from my retirement savings, and every time they accepted my help like it was owed, like it was nothing more than my duty. I told myself this was what fathers did, that Margaret would have wanted me to keep the family together, no matter what. But deep down, in the quiet moments when the house was empty, and I sat staring at our wedding photo on the mantel, I felt the first tremors of doubt. Was I being loved, or was I being used? The answer became clearer as time went on. Emma and Mark began suggesting changes around the house whenever they visited. "You should think about downsizing, Dad," Mark would say casually, running his hand along the banister. "This place is a lot for one man to handle." Emma would chime in, "It's just, you don't need all this space anymore. Wouldn't it be easier in a condo?" Their voices carried the same tune, a rehearsed duet of manipulation. I laughed it off at first. Downsizing? This house was my life. But the way they exchanged glances when I resisted, it unsettled me. The last straw before everything unraveled came one Sunday afternoon. They had brought the kids over, and while they ran through the hallways, Emma cornered me in the kitchen. She spoke softly, almost gently, but her words chilled me to the bone. "Dad, you know eventually this house will be mine anyway. Why not just make it official now? Sign it over. That way you don't have to worry." I nearly dropped the mug I was holding. "Make it official?" I repeated, trying to steady my voice. She nodded, her eyes firm, almost businesslike. "Mark and I could handle things. You'd still live here, of course, but it would give us security." I stared at her, seeing not the little girl I raised, but a stranger with my daughter's face. That night, I sat awake in the master bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan turning above me. I remembered the sound of Margaret's laughter, the warmth of Emma's small hand in mine, the years of sacrifice, sweat, and sleepless nights. And I realized for the first time that something was deeply, dangerously wrong. Because love doesn't ask for signatures on dotted lines. Love doesn't look you in the eye and ask you to surrender everything you've built. I should have seen it sooner. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It crept in like a draft under the door, cold and subtle, until suddenly it filled every corner of my life. It started one late afternoon when Emma stopped by with Mark. They were all smiles, unusually kind, bringing takeout, and sitting with me in the kitchen like old times. "Dad," Emma said, "we've been thinking about helping you with some of the house expenses. You shouldn't have to shoulder everything." Mark slid a neat stack of papers across the table, speaking smoothly. "Just standard forms for insurance adjustments and a little estate planning. Nothing major. It'll just make things easier in the future." I hesitated, my instincts twitching. But Emma smiled, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "It's just paperwork, Dad, for security." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that somewhere inside, the little girl I raised still cared. My tired eyes skimmed the papers, the legal jargon a blur. And with trust I should have held back, I signed. Weeks later, I found out what I had really done. It was a Sunday morning when a knock rattled the front door. I opened it to find two men in suits, carrying briefcases and official-looking envelope. "Mr. Collins?" one asked. When I nodded, he handed me a thick packet. "We're here to inform you that ownership of this property has been transferred. You are required to vacate the premises within 30 days. The words spun around me like a storm. "Transferred?" I croaked. The man tapped the paper. "Quitclaim deed. Signed and notarized. This property now belongs to Emma Collins and Mark Reeves." I stumbled back, the floor tilting beneath me. My hands shook as I turned page after page, seeing my own signature there, clear as day, on a document I had barely understood. I looked up at them, desperate. This is my house. I built it. I raised my family here. This has to be a mistake. But the men's faces were blank. Professional. "You'll need to take that up in court. We're just here to deliver notice." That night, Emma and Mark came over. Not to apologize, but to gloat. Emma's tone was firm, almost rehearsed. "Dad, it's done. The house is ours now. We told you this was for the best. You'll still have a place here, of course, but it'll be under our terms." Mark leaned against the counter, smirking. "You've got 30 days to get comfortable with the idea. Or pack." I couldn't breathe. 30 days? For me to accept that my own daughter had taken the very roof over my head? The humiliation grew sharper a week later, when Emma and Mark threw a housewarming party. Invitations went out to neighbors, friends, even members of our extended family. I wasn't consulted. When I walked into my own living room, I froze. Balloons and banners declared, "Welcome to our new home." People clapped as Emma raised a glass of wine. "Mark and I are so grateful to finally start this new chapter," she said, smiling as if nothing was amiss. "This house will be where our children grow, where we build our future." I stood at the back, invisible, my heart pounding in my chest. Every word was like acid. Our home, my home, rebranded as theirs while I still lived in it. Some relatives glanced at me awkwardly, pity in their eyes, but no one spoke up. Then came the moment that shattered me. Emma clinked her glass, calling for attention. "I know this has been a big adjustment for my dad," she said lightly, "but he's agreed it's best this way. He knows it's time for the next generation to take over." Laughter rippled through the room. Even Mark's parents chuckled, toasting their glasses. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I wanted to scream. I never agreed to any of this. But when I looked around the room, I realized something devastating. No one would believe me. The papers were signed. The house was already theirs in the eyes of the law. I slipped out quietly, my chest heavy, retreating to the garage where the old oak table still sat. My sanctuary, reduced to a storage room. The noise of celebration seeped through the walls, every cheer a nail in the coffin of my dignity. Days blurred together after that. I moved into the small guest room, stripped of comfort, while Emma and Mark rearranged the house as though I were just a tenant. The master bedroom, my bedroom, became theirs. My photographs vanished from the walls, replaced by their smiling faces. The shelves that once held Margaret's books were filled with their trinkets and decorations. One evening, I came home from running errands to find movers hauling out my old recliner. Orders from the new owners, one said flatly. I stood there, powerless, as pieces of my life were carried away. And then came the cruelest cut of all. I overheard Mark on the phone, laughing, saying, "The old man didn't even realize what he signed. Can you believe it? We've got the house, the land, everything, practically for free." My blood boiled, but I stayed silent, retreating back to my guest room. The night they changed the locks on the garage, I knew it was no longer mine. I had become a stranger in my own home. Emma, my flesh and blood, walked past me in the hall like I was nothing more than a stubborn tenant overstaying his welcome. One evening, she caught me staring at the front porch, remembering the evenings Margaret and I had sat there together. Emma's voice was cool, almost impatient. "Dad, you really should consider moving out. It'll be easier for everyone. Mark and I have plans for this place, and we need the space. Plans for this place." I nodded quietly, my throat burning. I didn't argue, I didn't fight, not then. But something shifted inside me. That night, lying in the narrow bed of the guest room, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the muffled laughter of Emma and Mark from the master bedroom that once belonged to Margaret and me. My hands clenched into fists. My heart ached, but my mind was clear. I would not forget this. I would not forgive it. And though I said nothing, though I gave no sign, though I let them believe I was broken and defeated, inside, something quiet and dangerous was waking. They thought I was broken. They thought I had given up, shuffling quietly between the guest room and the kitchen like some ghost haunting the halls of his own home. And for a while, I let them believe it. Silence, after all, is its own kind of disguise. But silence also gives a man time to think. And as the days stretched into weeks, I thought a great deal. Every creak of the floorboards, every misplaced photograph, every laugh that echoed from the master bedroom became fuel. I studied them the way a hunter studies his prey. Quiet, patient, waiting for the first opportunity to strike. It came in the form of the mortgage statement. I had kept the bills in my name even after Emma and Mark forced the house into theirs. They hadn't bothered to update everything yet, too busy redecorating and throwing their little new homeowner parties. When the monthly statement arrived, addressed to me as it had for years, I opened it. My name was still there, listed as the primary payer. The account hadn't yet been switched. And in that moment, I realized something important. Ownership might have shifted on paper, but in the tangled world of banks and bureaucracy, things moved slowly. Too slowly for Emma and Mark's taste. I went down to the bank the next morning. I spoke with the manager, an older gentleman I'd known for years. "I'd like to pause automatic payments on the mortgage," I said calmly. "Financial reason." He didn't question it. He just nodded, tapped a few keys, and handed me the confirmation slip. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. The following month, the storm hit. Emma and Mark came into the kitchen one evening, a letter clutched in Emma's hand. "Dad," she said sharply, "did you know the bank sent us a notice about a missed payment? They're threatening late fees." I looked up from my coffee, feigning confusion. "That's strange," I murmured. "I thought everything was set up automatically. Maybe you two should look into switching it over properly. It is your house now, isn't it?" Mark's jaw tightened. Emma's eyes darted to him, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "Oh, we'll handle it," Mark snapped, stuffing the letter back into the envelope. And just like that, the first seed was planted. They wanted the house. They could deal with the weight of it, the responsibility, the paperwork, the headaches. It was no longer my burden. It was theirs. But I wasn't finished. I started small, subtle. When I overheard Emma planning a renovation, talking about tearing down the old garage to put in a modern office space, I made a quiet call to the local zoning office. "This property has some restrictions," I told the clerk, giving them the parcel number. "Historical element. You'll want to check before approving anything." It wasn't a lie. The garage had been built decades ago under special permits, the kind that tangled things up for months. Sure enough, a week later, I heard Emma slamming the phone down in the kitchen. "They said we need an inspection before we can start. Who even cares about a stupid old garage?" I sipped my tea in the guest room, a thin smile tugging at my lips. One more crack in their perfect little vision. The real victory, though, came with the utilities. Mark, ever arrogant, had assumed I was still handling most of the bills. One evening, he barked at me from the living room. "Jimmy, the cable's acting up again. Call the company, will you?" I walked in, hands folded. "Mark," I said gently, "I think you should call them. After all, you're the homeowner now. These accounts shouldn't be under my name anymore." He stared at me, thrown off by the firmness in my tone. Emma tried to soften it. "Dad, can't you just—" "No," I interrupted, my voice steady. "It's your house. Your responsibility." The silence that followed was delicious. That week, the internet went down for 2 days before they got it sorted. Their kids missed online classes. Mark missed a conference call. I stayed in my room, reading my old books by lamplight, unaffected. For once, they were the ones inconvenienced, not me. And slowly, they began to notice. Emma knocked on my door one evening, her voice quieter than usual. "Dad, did you change something with the bank? They said the account holder isn't clear anymore." I looked at her evenly, my expression unreadable. "All I know is, things take time when papers are switched around. You'll figure it out. You and Mark always do." She bit her lip, her confidence wavering. For the first time in months, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a child. Uncertainty. And I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about control. They had stolen the house on paper, but I still knew its bones, its veins, its secrets. Every creaky step, every drafty window, every outdated regulation. This was my battlefield, not theirs. The night I overheard them arguing was the sweetest moment yet. Emma's voice cracked with frustration. "Mark, you said it would be simple. Just sign the papers and we'd be done. Why are the bills still in Dad's name? Why are we getting calls from the bank?" Mark's voice rose, defensive. "I'm handling it. These things take time. Don't blame me because your father's dragging his feet." I leaned against the wall in the hallway, listening, my chest warm. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the one being scolded, belittled, or dismissed. They were turning on each other, the cracks widening. And yet, I said nothing. I moved quietly through the house, polite as ever, letting them believe I was still defeated. But inside, the energy had shifted, because now I wasn't the one on shaky ground. They were. For every small victory I claimed, Emma and Mark pushed back harder. It wasn't in their nature to admit defeat. They weren't satisfied with owning the house on paper. They wanted me erased from it completely. It began with the lawyer's letter. A thick envelope slid under my door one morning, the kind printed on expensive stationery that smells faintly of ink and intimidation. Inside, pages upon pages of legal jargon, highlighted clauses, underlined demands. According to their lawyer, my continued occupancy of the property was an undue burden on the rightful owners. They were offering me a generous arrangement, a small monthly stipend if I agreed to vacate within 60 days. A stipend. Like I was some old tenant they were paying off. Emma delivered it herself later that evening, standing in the doorway of my small guest room with arms crossed. "Dad, it's time," she said softly, but her eyes were steel. "We'll help you find a place. This is better for everyone." I looked at her, my daughter, and felt the sting of her words burn deeper than the ink on the pages. "Better for everyone," I repeated. "Everyone but me." Mark leaned against the door frame, smirking. "You had your run, Jimmy. It's our turn now." I didn't reply. Not then. But inside, a plan I'd been shaping quietly in the shadows began to crystallize. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that long before Margaret passed, she and I had prepared for the future. Not just with this house, but with the small piece of land her parents had left her in the next county. 30 acres of quiet forest, forgotten by most, but carefully documented and protected. When Margaret was sick, we'd spoken about it often. "If anything happens, Jimmy," she'd said, her voice weak but steady, "make sure Emma never forgets where she comes from. That land will always be ours." I never told Emma about it, at first because she was too young, later because she grew too entitled. But I had kept the paperwork locked away, hidden in a fireproof box beneath the floorboards of the garage. Deed, tax records, everything in order. And now, that secret was about to become my weapon. The day after receiving their lawyer's threat, I visited an old friend, Harold, a retired notary, and one of the few men I trusted. Over coffee at his kitchen table, I laid out the documents. His eyes widened as he flipped through them. "Jimmy, this land's still in your name. Taxes all paid up. It's clean." I nodded slowly. "I need to make sure it stays that way. And I need a witness who can vouch these documents were never tampered with." Harold raised an eyebrow. "You planning something?" I didn't answer directly. I just said, "Let's call it protecting what's mine." Back at the house, I let Emma and Mark believe their intimidation was working. I carried myself smaller, slower, as though beaten down by the weight of their legal game. Meanwhile, I planted the second seed. At dinner one night, Emma pressed me again. "Dad, you'll be happier in a smaller place. You can't keep up with this house forever." I looked at her with tired eyes. "Maybe you're right, but you'll regret pushing me out. You don't know everything about what you've inherited." Her fork clattered against her plate. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just an old man's thoughts," I said, excusing myself. The doubt was there now, flickering in her expression. Mark tried to brush it off, but Emma's mind worked differently. She had always been curious, sometimes too curious, and that was exactly what I wanted. Sure enough, a few days later, I caught Mark snooping in the garage. He rifled through boxes, muttering under his breath, unaware that I watched from the shadows. He found nothing, of course. The documents were hidden too well. But the fact that he looked told me I had struck a nerve. Then came their counterattack. One evening, I returned home to find a sheriff's deputy parked out front. Emma and Mark stood on the porch, looking smug. The deputy handed me another paper, this time an official eviction notice. They had filed in court, claiming I was trespassing on property I no longer owned. I had 30 days to appear, or I'd be forcibly removed. The humiliation burned like fire in my chest. Neighbors watched from across the street as I stood there, holding the paper, my daughter looking at me like I was nothing more than a stubborn squatter. I went inside without a word. But that night, I retrieved the fireproof box from under the floorboards. I laid the deeds out on the oak table, smoothing each page with my hands. 30 acres, untouched, unspoiled, mine. And in that moment, the twist revealed itself. Because while Emma and Mark had been so focused on stealing this house, they had no idea there was another asset, bigger, more valuable, that still belonged to me. And I had every intention of making sure they knew they'd chosen the wrong man to cross. I made another quiet call, this time to Harold. Together, we drew up a trust, a binding legal document naming the land as part of a foundation, one that Emma and Mark could never touch, not directly, not without me. And then, to make sure the message would hit where it hurt most, I left just enough breadcrumbs for them to discover it. I casually mentioned to Emma one morning over coffee, "You ever think about how much Margaret loved her family's land? 30 acres is a lot of space." Her spoon froze midair. "What land?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, nothing. Just some old paperwork. You and Mark wouldn't be interested." But of course, she was. That evening, I overheard them in the living room. Emma's voice was sharp, almost frantic. "Why didn't he tell us about this? 30 acres could be worth a fortune," Mark hissed back. "He's bluffing, just trying to scare us. If there's land, we'll find it. We'll make him hand it over." Their greed had blinded them again, and that was my advantage. The next time they confronted me, it was in the kitchen. Emma's tone was cold, demanding. "Dad, we need to talk about that land." I leaned back in my chair, meeting her gaze steadily. "It's not for you. Not now. Not ever." Mark slammed his hand on the counter. "We'll see about that. You won't stop us." I didn't flinch. I simply folded the papers back into the box, locked it, and said one line that silenced them both. "You stole this house from me, but I promise you this. You'll never touch what truly belongs to me." The air thickened, the standoff sharp and quiet. Emma's face flushed with anger. Mark's jaw clenched, but I stayed calm, my voice steady, because for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the one cornered. I was the one holding the cards. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm cloud. For weeks, Emma and Mark had strutted through the house with smug satisfaction, whispering to each other in the kitchen, their lawyer on speakerphone at all hours. They believed the eviction was certain, that soon I'd be cast out like some worn-out relic, with no roof, no voice, no dignity. "Don't worry, Dad," Emma had said with false sweetness the night before. "Tomorrow will be quick. Once the judge sees everything, it'll all be settled. You'll finally be free of the stress of this house." Free, that was the word she used, as if stripping me of my life's work was some kind of gift. I didn't argue. I let her believe I was resigned. I nodded, went back to my small guest room, and closed the door quietly. But I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the old oak table in the garage, Margaret's picture beside me, and went through the papers one last time. The trust, the deeds, the notarized statements. Every detail lined up perfectly. My plan was ready. The courthouse was crowded the next morning. Family, neighbors, even a few curious faces from town filled the benches. Emma and Mark arrived with their lawyer, all polished smiles and pressed suits, shaking hands with distant cousins as though they were hosting a gala. I walked in alone, carrying only a worn leather folder. The judge called us forward. Emma's lawyer began with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, this case is simple. My clients, Emma Collins and Mark Reeves, are the rightful owners of the Collins residence by virtue of a legally executed quitclaim deed. Mr. Collins, the defendant, is unlawfully occupying the property and has refused all reasonable offers to vacate. We are here to enforce the rightful transfer." Heads nodded in the audience. Emma lifted her chin, proud, glowing in the spotlight of her own betrayal. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, leaning on the table for support, my voice low but steady. "Your Honor, I won't deny signing papers. I trusted my daughter. Perhaps too much. But what hasn't been said here is that while they schemed to take my home, they overlooked something far more important." A murmur rippled through the room. Emma stiffened. Mark whispered sharply to the lawyer, who waved him down. I reached into my folder and placed a stack of documents on the bench. "This," I said, "is the deed to 30 acres of land in Ashford County. Land that's been in my family for generations, left to me by my late wife's parents. Taxes are paid. Records are clean. And as of last month, it has been placed into a trust that I control." Emma's face paled. Mark's smirk faltered. I continued calmly, every word measured. "I may have been tricked into giving up the house I built, but this land, this untouched piece of earth, remains mine. And in my trust, I have ensured it will never belong to them. Not now, not ever." Gasps spread across the courtroom. A cousin in the back whispered loudly, 30 acres? That's worth a fortune. The judge raised an eyebrow, reviewing the documents. And this is properly notarized? Yes, Your Honor. Witnessed by Harold Bennett, retired notary of this county. Harold, sitting proudly in the front row, gave a firm nod. The lawyer fumbled, papers rustling. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. On the contrary, I interrupted, my voice carrying now, stronger than it had been in years. It is more relevant than anything. My daughter and her husband claimed I was incapable of managing my affairs, that I needed them to take over. Yet here is proof I have managed, quietly and responsibly, something far greater than this house. Proof that their arguments about my so-called incompetence are nothing but lies. Emma shot to her feet, her voice breaking. Dad, why didn't you tell me about this? I looked at her, my heart heavy but resolute. Because I knew what you'd do, and you proved me right. The silence that followed was sharp as glass. The judge finally spoke, his tone cool. Mr. Collins may have signed away ownership of the residence, but he is clearly competent in his affairs. Any claim of incapacity is without merit. As for the eviction, while the plaintiffs may be within their rights, I strongly suggest mediation before any enforcement. Considering Mr. Collins's contributions and the circumstances, the court expects both parties to act in good faith. Translation: the judge wasn't impressed by Emma and Mark's greed. The room knew it. But the real blow came not from the gavel, but from me. I turned, facing the benches where family and neighbors sat watching. My voice was calm, even, but every syllable carried decades of love turned to ash. I gave my daughter everything, I said. Every shift I worked, every dollar I saved, every dream I had was for her. And in return, she took my home and tried to throw me out like garbage. But let it be known, while they stole what was in my hands, they will never touch what's in my heart, or what I've built to last beyond them. I turned back to Emma, meeting her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. And then I delivered the line I had been holding inside for months. Quiet, steady, undeniable. You may own these walls, Emma, but you'll never own me. The room fell silent, utterly, painfully silent. Emma lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning. Mark shifted uncomfortably, no longer smirking, his confidence cracked wide open for all to see. The family that once chuckled at their arrogance now stared in judgment, whispers carrying through the air like wildfire. For the first time, they were the ones humiliated, publicly, irrevocably. I left the courtroom that day not as a defeated old man, but as a father who had finally reclaimed his dignity. I didn't need their house. I had something far greater. The satisfaction of watching their greed crumble in front of everyone who mattered. And as I stepped into the sunlight outside, the weight lifted from my shoulders. For years, I had carried guilt, shame, and heartbreak. Now, I carried only one thing, the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had won. In the weeks after the hearing, the house grew strangely quiet. Emma and Mark no longer walked with the same swagger. The laughter that once echoed through the halls had soured into hushed arguments behind closed doors. They still lived there, yes, but the victory they had craved so desperately was hollow. The family had seen their greed exposed in public. Neighbors whispered. Even their children looked at them differently, sensing that something had cracked. As for me, I stopped fighting them for the house. I didn't need to. Every time they looked at me across the dinner table, they saw their own reflection in my silence. Two people who had betrayed the very man who gave them everything. That was punishment enough. I spent more time in the garage, sanding wood, repairing old furniture, working with my hands as I always had. Some evenings I drove out to the land in Ashford County, walking the quiet acres Margaret had left behind. The trees there whispered a different kind of truth, steady, eternal, untouched by greed. I'd sit under the pines with her picture in my hand and feel something I hadn't felt in years, peace. Emma tried, once, to bridge the gap. She came to me in the kitchen one night, her voice softer than I'd heard in a long while. "Dad, I didn't mean for things to go this far." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the little girl I raised, but a grown woman learning the hard way what greed costs. "Emma," I said quietly, "a house is just walls and wood, but respect? Respect is the foundation of a family, and once it's gone, it's hard to rebuild." She had no reply. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't comfort her. Some lessons, I realized, cannot be softened. Mark avoided me after that. He walked stiffly through the halls, pride wounded, his arrogance stripped bare. In town, people no longer praised him. They questioned him. The image he had worked so hard to cultivate was stained, and though I never raised my voice, never sought revenge beyond what had already unfolded, life itself carried out the rest of the sentence. As for me, I chose peace. I no longer clung to the master bedroom, the furniture, the trinkets of the past. I had something greater: dignity, memory, and freedom. I spent weekends with old friends, evenings on the porch, mornings in the forest, where Margaret's laughter still seemed to linger in the wind. And in those quiet moments, I thought often of how it had all begun, of the little girl who once promised to buy me a big house when she grew up, and of the father who only ever wanted her happiness. Life has a way of circling back. She did take my house, in her own way, but she lost something greater in return: the unshakable bond between father and daughter. I didn't gloat. I didn't remind her. I simply lived, steady and calm, knowing the truth needed no defense. Because in the end, that is the lesson life had carved into me. Possessions can be stolen, signatures can be forged, even homes can be claimed. But the respect of a parent, the honor of a name, the dignity of a life well lived, those are earned, not taken. And when children forget that, when they trade love for greed, time itself becomes the great equalizer. Call it karma, call it justice, call it God's hand, but sooner or later, every debt comes due. I sat one evening at the oak table, running my hand across its surface, and whispered into the empty room, "You may take my house, but you'll never take the man I became in it." And with that, the storm was over. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts, or even your own experiences in the comments below. Every story carries a lesson, and your voice may help someone else find theirs. And if you want more stories like this, tales of family, respect, and the price of betrayal, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support means everything, and it helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.